So today I wanted to quickly talk about diet, and I want to give you a different perspective on what it means to find a diet, what it means to be on a diet. So rather than thinking of maximal nutrition or maximal nourishment, which is, of course, a very important factor of whatever you're consuming, there's actually, that's not only tricky, but even if you do end up in a diet that is nutritious, there food has much more to offer than just nutrition. And I'm not talking about maximizing the sensual experience of it. In fact, I'm talking about something that is slightly counter to that. So I'll show you here. So these are shiitake mushrooms. Here's dulce, and this is a sea vegetable. I also usually have some version of wakame um, and kombu, but since we're shelter in place, I've actually had less sea vegetables. And then here we just have a combination of vegetables, including carrot, it looks like a zucchini, celery, broccoli. So you can see all that. I have a root vegetable, honglobo, likely in Chinese. Brussels sprouts, other root vegetable, a fresh mushroom, unlike the shiitake, which was dry. Broccoli, there's that. And then usually I have cabbage of some sort of lettuce or cabbage, and then it's really my mainstay. I usually have all of this in a sitting, and this is just kale or ganlan. And then I also have some herbs. You can see cilantro. There's some extra broccoli here. Also parsley and some mushrooms. So I hope you were able to see all that. And so usually my diet consists of a little bit more sea vegetables, and I usually have like haitai or seaweed, untoasted. And so all of the food that I eat is not heated, and it generally consists of food that is highly nutritious and where taste isn't the most important offering. And so that's very important. So a big part of this is how should we think about our diets? So the way I got to this diet was actually slowly going from cooked foods like Chipotle. I used to eat fast food all the time. Taco Bell, mostly Taco Bell. Lots of late night rushes after drinking lots of alcohol, and then eventually having Taco Bell to finish off the night and becoming very addicted to Taco Bell. But it's not fair to make Taco Bell the issue here. And that's why we need to think about food differently. Food is really, our relationship with food is more important than the food itself. So the fact that I eat this, and I also didn't show you, I also have lots of nuts throughout the day, shirin or almonds, walnuts, sometimes cashews, kaishingo, which is pistachios. Yeah, whatever is available usually. I'll have a variety of nuts, macadamia nuts, and so forth. So, and I've checked this with a couple of different doctors and nutritionists and have revised it over time to ensure that I was getting enough. And most of my my I guess just looking at uh, longevity of how how long some of this food lasts, like root vegetables and even ganlan or kale. This food is easier to store. Obviously, it's not as storable as processed food. So, okay, I have this diet, I got to this diet. So I eat everything raw. So for me, there's no issue just taking this and having some myself. And what I usually do is it does take me quite a bit longer to eat. Um, and especially like the root vegetables. So this one is not washed, which is not good during this time. Well, this is also a beet, Tian Tai Gen, I believe, in Chinese. So here's the change in perspective that was required for me. First, I focused on getting food that was nutritious and also that it didn't reasonably gross me out in some way. And I used to not like a lot of oily foods and so forth, and trying to get away from that. So I went from fast food to thinking, okay, I need to find healthy food, and I was switching over to not raw. I never decided that I'm going to be a raw vegan, but it just culminated that that would be the case. What I actually did was my partner and I, at that time, we were switching out each food item. So we both had small bento boxes, and what we would do is, for each item, we would try to find the item we like the most, and replace it with an item that we really dislike, like really dislike. Actually, Tian Tai Gen or beets used to be, for both of us, really hard because we used to get beets this large, and we would eat them as a snack, along with like fennel and several other like shutai or vegetables or roots that we didn't like, and we'd have to stay with it for at least 2 weeks, every single day eating it. And there was several questions such as, how does my relationship change? And my hypothesis at the time is, well, what we're really trying to do is, what the brain should be doing is making an evaluation on a food object or food item and understanding the nutritional content. We should get that signal, and then we should be given a value for that food item based on its nutritional output. And we know that that doesn't happen because the um, eating ends up being, or put ingesting food, you don't get processing of nutritional value until after the fact. And usually the act of eating invokes seeing it first or smelling it first. And so it's not a very direct path. So you actually have easy ways to manipulate the mind into something smelling very good or something tasting very good or triggering a certain memory. There's lots of ways to trick our systems. And so what I wanted to do was, well, was there a way to untrick the system? Could I, if there was a nutritional item that was in front of me that I needed, let's say I was low on iron, and there was something that had a lack of iron, but a lot of other things like sugar or lots of other refined ingredients. I knew that in the past I would reach for the thing that I would want from a hedonic perspective, right? From a pleasure. That's going to be a experience that is much better than the iron that's in the seaweed, um, unless it's cooked and oiled and has some of those refined elements. So my main goal was to change that relationship. But instead, what happened was something interesting. So as I kept eating those things that I didn't like, week and week would go by and it would be a challenge. And you could just kind of see yourself becoming averse and then becoming less averse or it rising again. And all these combinations of emotions, of thoughts, of narratives, fighting back and forth of why I should eat this, why I shouldn't eat this. And you watch this battle. And uh, if you've cultivated a level of awareness where you're actually watching you being you, meaning watching the battle as it occurs, you start to see how interesting the mind is. And so that started really, food was one of my deep dives into the workings of the mind. So I eat all this now without a problem. And I don't have any cheat days. There's not a day where I go, I'm going to eat processed food today. I just don't. And I can walk into stores, I can smell things. There is no trigger for me to go back to the good old days. There is no nostalgic there. What I can say is I can remember when I thought Taco Bell was amazing, but I cannot say that I've ever been triggered ever to go to Taco Bell. So the fact that actually the actual desires were completely extinguished as far as I can tell is an amazing thing that happened that, to be quite honest, I don't exactly know how that happened. But I can tell you some of the remnants was by trying to maximize for this nutritional value and to trying to get over, trying to correct the mind, um, a lot of things started to lose it's their pull on me. I started to become more curious about what's my mind going to do this time. So I moved from I got to do the right thing and morally kind of scolding myself about it to, oh, this is interesting. I wonder how the mind is going to react to this. Here's this really weird vegetable that smells really bad. This is going to be pretty good. So there's this excitement about approaching it. All of a sudden, I just became curious at throwing things at the mind and seeing what happens. And in a way, the way I'm saying it is if it's not my mind. And in a way, that's what I started to experience, this gap, this gap between me, whatever that means, and my mind. So being in awareness and then observing your mind like you do in meditation, you're not you're not totally sold on the idea that every thought that's popping up is yours. And when you start to have that gap, you start to cultivate that gap. And I think that's what I was doing through each of these food experiments, was cultivating the gap and seeing that these thoughts were being generated, desires, and then it would go even further. I would find myself in certain situations wanting certain types of food, and I had this idea that people do have food preferences, and those are maybe even cultural and blah, blah, blah. But instead, what you have is literally, if you look at it closely, just patterns of thoughts and feelings and context that end up unraveling over time. And then all of a sudden, you're, 20 scoops deep into ice cream. And so there's not a need to bracket food into right and wrong. That's one of the things I like. Um, because everyone is going to have a different reaction. So if I brought ice cream to someone who loves cookies but really hates ice cream, it's not because they overcame ice cream. It's not because they're morally superior or anything like that. It just, ice cream doesn't have that pull on them. And so what I would advise exploring is, what foods really do that to you? And then don't reject them. Actually have them. So as far as me looking at the picking out the foods that were averse to me, you can also pick out the foods that you think are the best. And there were foods like that, especially around nuts, certain specific nuts. For a while, maybe 2.5 years ago, I was really addicted to caixinha, pistachios. which I'm no longer addicted. But when I was, um, that would be the thing I would go to after I have an argument with my partner. Like, oh, okay. And so when you start to really explore your relationship with food in this non judgmental but slightly curious way, things start to happen. And so then I had, by a couple of years ago, I had stopped going to all restaurants. So I haven't been to a restaurant and ordered food in maybe 2 or 3 years. And in fact, I rarely even go to the grocery store now because I do most of it all on Amazon and I get it delivered to me. But even before that, I, I mean, even now, since I live in a monastery, a lot of the fresh produce is provided by the kitchen. So I only have to supplement that. Um, so that's amazing. And so I don't even have, when I'm walking down the street, I have no instinct to go to a store. I don't have that feeling or longing to go to a store. And that has been correlated with through that exploration of finding out through these foods what who I am, what are these desires, impulses, in a non-judgmental way, just looking at them. I started to cultivate a sense of not only the awareness but also figuring out that wow, this mind can survive off anything. It depends on the way that you shape it, depends on the way that you train it. And really, a lot of the Taco Bell, all this situation was just an part of, unexamined parts of my life. Parts that I just let fall together into a bunch of habitual patterns that I was hooked to and I was completely identified with. And then when I stopped being identified just by the act of looking closely, that, I used to look at this and I used to just stare at it and see what was going to come up and imagine eating it, not even eating it. And it used to leave this harsh feeling in my throat. And actually, the reason I stopped eating these, the big ones, because actually it became, it made my throat very um, scratchy, almost as if it was scratching it, and it was very acidic. Um, so I don't consume that much anymore. But the point was, I would go through all of these aversions and all of these situations. I'd be thinking of the future of eating it, and why do I have to eat it? And isn't there lots of other things that go? And I think pistachios, and then like okay, but I gotta stay here. I have to stay with it. And I didn't know what I was practicing was being able to sit with my emotions, with my thoughts, with all of the trips. The trip of, oh, you're a really good person if you eat this, or the trip of, well, you did really good. Yesterday you had like two of them, and that one was really large, and maybe you don't have to have this one today. Maybe that's true. Maybe I should give myself a day off. And just going through and watching the whole trip with awareness. And I would end up laughing at my partner who wasn't doing that at the time would, just see me laughing um, at myself. Not in this like judgmental, feel bad about myself way, but just in this is amazing. Look at this mind. Look at this mind. So this opened up a whole new perspective on food and my relationship to it and my relationship to everything. So I ended up calling this um, condiments, right? Like I called it three things that I saw that were coming out of these experiments, which was condiments, cosmetics, and anesthetics. These are the things we must observe deeply. Not that we shouldn't observe other things, but these things. So, condiments is when you reject something unless it has certain pleasurable qualities to it. Um, Because what happens is when you do condiments, it makes you unable to take whatever it was in its raw form. And that might not be important in food. Like, it doesn't matter if you're raw or not, really. Um, that's not like the grand um, diet. The point is, abstract that and take it over to anything else. So, what happens usually with food, and I've watched it so closely, you can start to add condiments to your food. You can do this over and over. I mean, take a month off of condiments first and get over the miserable part of it. Um, at the Whole Foods, during this shelter in place, a lot of people took a lot of food to save up for the length of time we were going to stay, that they thought we were going to stay for this coronavirus. And in the chip section, someone took a photo and said, the only chips that are left are unsalted. And so salt isn't bad. Too much of it is definitely bad. But we're not making a moral claim. What we're doing is, so going back to my point is, so you have the unsalted chips all the time, let's say. Now, chips themselves or crisps themselves are already pretty powerful, but let's just say unsalted, unflavored. So then when you go off of it for a month, start to go back on it. And have some sort of setup where you can go back and taste the original. And what happens is when you focus on pleasure like that, you neurobiologically make other things worse. And you make yourself you make it you become intolerant of a range of other things. So the more that you eat sweet stuff that is very sweet, the less likely you can take, let's say, a slightly sweetened drink. You're like, what is this? Um, so now abstract that to the mind and just imagine that you are you only want to hear good stuff about yourself at the company. So people are telling you a bunch of good things mostly. So it's going to, if you hang on to those and internalize them, like, yeah, I really like hearing good things about myself. When someone tells you something bad, it's going to be a lot worse and intolerable. So actually the right position, there is a optimal position to take. It is not the righteous position, but it's a optimal position when you're considering the amount of suffering that you're going to endure. So the optimal position, I do raw and I also do unflavored, basically everything. But if they end up sending me flavored something like um, I try to have the carrots that are less sweet. So like baby carrots, since they've been so productized around kids, um, they're often much sweeter than a lot of other carrots. And the optimal position to take is neither totally unflavored or flavored. The optimal position to take is to be okay with all of those and not attach yourself to needing that. So if every time a movie comes on, you need to get yourself a something that maximizes the pleasure. So I'm watching a movie and I need to add some pleasure to that. Let's add some ice cream. And then ice cream is not enough. Let's add some popcorn. Let's get some popcorn and then maybe, cuddle up with my love and maybe invite the pet too and then maybe Pepsi, maybe a good fizzy drink, and yeah, this movie is great. And so you maximize that pleasure. That can't be the way to go, because it makes your other experiences of just going outside less stimulating. So that's what happens. We even have it in neurobiology where you say, okay, if we got a neuron and they've got a bunch of receptors, if you overstimulate those receptors, um, well, it's more technical than that, but let's say the basic understanding is that a neuron has a given set of receptors. And if it's being overstimulated, it will tuck in some of those receptors. So, meaning those receptors are basically gone. So, maybe we start with 10 receptors. Then I feel like, or the cell feels like, okay, this is too much pleasure, too much excitation. Let's have 6 receptors. And so the intake of the neurotransmitters that it can actually take in is less, meaning to get the same high, you need more. So this is the law, or the way that it's talked about is called habituation. So you habituate. But from a spiritual perspective, you have the same situation happening. So you are going to be in more pain the more pleasure you get. It's so weird, because it shouldn't, we don't really want it to work that way. But that's how it works. The more pleasure you get, the less pleasurable other things that don't have the same amount of excitation become. So for you, walking outside and looking at the leaves may not be that stimulating. And so, what's the goal of all this? The goal is, when I'm with myself, it's enriching. In a way, like, if we're honest, we want to be bliss without anything else added. And so it just becomes very obvious that the way to not do that is to externalize and to bring in as much external stimulation as possible in order to feel comfortable internally. So we automatically know, just intuitively, that that can't be the most efficient solution, because one, we're going to get habituated and need more and more and more. And those external things are unstable. They are resources that are finite. And our life, our like being, is infinite as far as we're concerned. So from life to death, we have, right, from being born to dying, we have a finite amount of time. But within that time, I can, you know, chemically change myself by doing all sorts of different practices so that I can actually internally regulate my own system. And I met a yogi once who, and this might be beside the point, but the guy was just laughing and just as light as a feather all the time, or like a lot of the time. And I was just considering, like, this guy's, it's either this guy's chemical makeup is basically, just he's lucked out, or this whatever he's doing is working. Um, and I have a friend who says, "I am drugs," and it's a funny statement, but in reality, like, you're drugs, you're a chemical factory, and all those things that you're getting blissed out for, desire, blah blah blah, those things are extrinsically fleeting, and what you would like to, where you would like to end up is to simply be bliss, to simply walk about the street and just taking in a breath, which is a big deal actually, and just feeling the basic goodness of living. And anything else is an added extra, right? So when I was able to come to the conclusion that yeah, this raw food, me feeling righteous, that only lasts for a while, and then I get into arguments about is raw healthy or not, and then I've had to insecurely try to find, well, what's the right structure of, or what's the right variety of vegetables, mushrooms, and sea vegetables, and being stressed out about being perceived a certain way, when I was able to let all that go by observing this mind and its chaos, I began to feel that sense of, well, if raw food ran out today, I'd be fine. I'd switch to whatever was available, and I'd be on this again, on this journey of learning about myself, of learning about how this mind works. And I've given up on diets. I've given up on. I don't identify as a vegan, although I do eat raw foods. Um, I don't heat up any food. I don't eat much fruit. Um, I don't drink any juices or teas or anything like that. Just water. I don't go to, like I said, restaurants, or I don't have any cravings for those things anymore. And if that change, I just adapt to it, and do whatever it's asking for me, as long as I have availability to take something directly, almost directly from the monastery's other. There's another monastery called Green Gulch that has um, a farm. If I could just take from that directly, and there's not a lot of human input other than bunch it up and wrap it, and then I get to have it. It's a great thing for me to be so connected with that. And at the same time, if I lost it, that would be okay as well. It would be another opportunity to learn about myself, to learn about how this mind works, and how we can stop jumping from diet to diet. I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian. We're always trying to find, or thinking in terms of performance. And what I mean by performance here is, we think, okay, well, I need to do all the right things, as if we're in a performance. But in reality, life, you could call it a game, but maybe it's better to call it life is always practice. Life is the practice. And when you think that way, it's not a performance. You don't need to get everything correct. It's a learning. The game is learning. The game is awareness. And if you're not accumulating that because you're stuck being a vegetarian, oh, I'm a vegetarian, so I do this, this, and this, and I do it correctly. And I get hot and bothered when people um, tell me that they eat meat. And to do that is to, again, put the ego ahead, instead of, if you actually looked at yourself, when you see all the games you're playing, all of the things you're getting hooked into, it becomes very hard to think righteously. Everyone should just stop eating meat. They absolutely should. Because climate change is a performance, unfortunately, right? So, in that way, we have this tension between our life is always practice, and even climate change to an extent is practice, but the consequences are fatal. In just the same way, like, if we see it as practice, that doesn't mean we're not taking it seriously. Um, and in a way, this is cutting through the root issue rather than posturing or trying to take a righteous position without really knowing what your mind is like. And because we are posturing and taking right positions, right identifications, we lose the ability to empathize with what other people might be going through and what are the hurdles, right, of understanding that, the way that the relationship they have with food and anxiety. When do they want meat? In what context does it come up? And to explore that. And the whole goal is to be free of having any preference, to be available for whatever is, and also to be discerning in a way that fits the world situation. Like right now, I believe if I'm discerning, this is the best thing I could be doing, or one of the, or closer, a better thing that I could be doing than what I used to be eating and consuming and putting a vote towards. But I don't believe I would have got there by sheer posturing and then being a vegan. And I think I would have probably been like sneaking off and having processed food, or like, because I really wouldn't have cut through the underlying issue. It's so important. It's so important to think about knowing your mind completely. That's the whole job to me. The whole job of life, no matter where you're going, is to have awareness of yourself, to understand yourself so intimately that taking a polarized position, such as I'm a vegan and that person's doing the wrong thing, is nearly impossible to hold for any good length of time. So that's some of my thoughts on food and how we can use food as a way to explore the mind. So thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at fanli@christianfanli.org. And if you have any comments, you can leave them below the video. Thanks.